A man fights against a minority family moving in, but ends up needing their help when disaster strikes. East Willow Street was the kind of place where everyone mowed their lawns on Saturdays and waved without saying much. It was safe, predictable, and, as Daniel Rhodes liked to say, untouched. A retired construction foreman, Daniel had lived there for 22 years. His late wife, Mary Ann, had chosen the house for its porch, where she used to drink lemonade and hum to the radio. After her passing, the house became Daniel's fortress. Every creak of its wooden frame reminded him of her. Every unfamiliar sound outside, however, reminded him of what he feared most: change. When the Rahman family moved in next door, everything shifted. A young couple with 2 small children, their laughter carried through the hedges, their accents were unfamiliar, their habits foreign. To Daniel, their arrival was a stain on perfection. He began noticing things: the smell of their food, the music that spilled from open windows, the way the father, Imran, prayed in the backyard. It wasn't hatred at first, just discomfort, the quiet kind that grows in the dark corners of a lonely man's heart. But it didn't stay quiet for long. The trouble began with the fence. One morning, Daniel noticed a section of his white wooden fence leaning. On the other side, Imran was planting a row of jasmine bushes. "Morning, Mr. Rhodes," Imran called out with a friendly smile. "I think the wind knocked this down. I can fix it for you." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Don't touch my property," he barked. Imran blinked, startled. "Of course, I just thought you thought wrong." Daniel snapped and turned away. That was the beginning of the invisible war. One fought with cold glances, mumbled complaints, and passive-aggressive noise reports. Daniel called the Homeowners Association twice that month. He even installed new security cameras, telling himself it was just in case. But what really disturbed him wasn't the fence or the noise. It was how easily the Rahmans seemed to belong. Their children rode bikes with the neighbors' kids. Their laughter echoed where silence once ruled. Daniel watched it all from behind his curtains, bitterness blooming like mold. By late summer, Daniel had rallied his small circle, retirees like him who remembered the good old days. They met in his garage on Wednesday nights, discussing preserving the character of the neighborhood. "First it's one family," said Greg, his longtime friend. "Then more follow. You know how it goes." Daniel nodded, hiding how much that thought comforted him. He wasn't alone in his resentment. It gave him purpose. They drafted a letter to the homeowners board, citing concerns about property values. But when the board dismissed their complaint, something inside Daniel twisted tighter. He began leaving his lights on all night, pacing the living room with talk radio blaring, voices that validated his fear, feeding it, shaping it into something dangerous. Outside, the Rahmans kept waving every morning. Imran even brought cookies once during the holidays. Daniel left them on the porch until the rain washed them away. It was the letter that pushed things over the edge. One night, Daniel slipped a note into the Rahmans' mailbox. It wasn't cruel in tone, but the message was clear. "People like you don't fit here. Leave while you can." The next morning, he saw Imran reading it at the mailbox, his shoulders stiff. His wife, Sarah, came out with tears in her eyes. Their little girl clung to her leg, asking what was wrong. Daniel closed the blinds. He told himself it wasn't hate, it was protection. But his hands trembled as he folded the newspaper, unable to meet his own reflection in the window. That afternoon, a police cruiser stopped in front of his house. The officer, polite but firm, asked if Daniel knew anything about the note. He denied it, of course. There was no proof. But later that night, Daniel couldn't sleep. The jasmine bushes next door glowed pale under the streetlight, their scent drifting through the air. He wished, absurdly, that he could ask Imran how to make them grow. The weather reports came quietly, almost unnoticed at first. A series of wildfires had spread through the valley, pushed by dry winds. East Willow Street wasn't in immediate danger. Not yet. Daniel watched the news with detached curiosity, until the sky turned amber one evening, and the air filled with ash. The scent of burning pine was sharp, invasive. He coughed, muttering about poor management, and closed his windows. Next door, Imran was loading water bottles into his car. "If it spreads," he told another neighbor, "we'll help everyone evacuate." Daniel scoffed when he heard it, always playing the hero. But that night, he dreamed of smoke curling under his door and Marianne's voice whispering, "You can't shut it out forever." By the next week, the air itself had changed. The mornings were dim, the sun reduced to a red smear behind a haze that thickened with each sunrise. Ash fell like strange snow over the rooftops. Daniel brushed it off his porch railings with an irritated grunt. The local news anchor spoke with calm urgency. Authorities urge all residents near Ridge Valley to prepare emergency kits in case the fires shift direction. Daniel switched off the television, muttering, "They always blow things out of proportion." But when he stepped outside, the air scratched his throat, dry and metallic. A faint, acrid scent lingered even inside his house. Across the street, kids wore masks as they played. Neighbors watered their lawns despite the restrictions, trying to ward off the creeping orange tint of death that hung above. He noticed the Rahmans again that evening, Imran fitting air filters on their windows, Sarah packing supplies in boxes. Daniel scoffed. "Overreacting?" he mumbled. Still, when night fell, he found himself double-checking his flashlight batteries and gathering his old camping gear, just in case. The following morning, he awoke to pounding on his door. It was Officer Vance, the same cop who'd questioned him about the letter weeks ago. "Mr. Rhodes," he said, "there's a voluntary evacuation in your zone. It might get mandatory if the winds pick up." Daniel waved him off. "Voluntary means optional," Vance frowned. "Just keep a bag ready. Roads might close fast." When the officer left, Daniel stood at the window. The horizon shimmered, distant, but not distant enough. He muttered to himself, "They'll control it, they always do." But deep down, something old and primal whispered otherwise. The night arrived suddenly, without warning, as disasters often do. It started with wind, hot and howling, rattling Daniel's shutters like fists. Then came the glow, faint at first, flickering across the tops of the distant hills. He went outside, barefoot on the cold concrete, and saw it, a wall of orange crawling toward the valley like a living thing. He froze. For the first time in years, Daniel felt truly small. The air was thick with smoke now, stinging his eyes. He hurried inside, slamming windows shut, cursing under his breath. The electricity flickered, and the television blared emergency alerts. He tried calling 911, but the lines were jammed. Then, a knock at the door. He ignored it at first, but the knocking came again, louder. "Mr. Rhodes!" a voice shouted. It was Imran. "The fire's moving fast. You need to come with us. We have space in our car." Daniel gripped the doorknob but didn't turn it. His pride, his fear, his decades of distrust held him frozen. "I'll be fine," he shouted back. "I'm staying put." "Sir, please!" Imran's voice cracked with urgency. "You don't understand." But Daniel was already walking away. He turned up the volume of the TV to drown him out. The feed showed live footage of nearby streets engulfed in flame. Then the power went out. Darkness swallowed the house whole. Only the faint, flickering light from outside painted the walls, orange, trembling, alive. For the first time in his life, Daniel prayed. It was the sound of breaking glass that woke him. A violent crash from the kitchen. Smoke poured in through the shattered window. Daniel coughed violently, stumbling toward the hallway. His chest burned. He grabbed a towel, wet it in the sink, and pressed it to his face. But the water pressure was gone. "Damn it!" he wheezed, stumbling back. The air had turned thick and black. Every breath hurt. He tried to reach the front door, but when he opened it, the world outside was fire. His porch was already smoldering. The fence, that pristine white fence he'd guarded so fiercely, was ablaze, flames crawling over it like hungry fingers. He staggered backward. His only escape now was through the garage. He pulled at the door, but the power outage had jammed it shut. He searched blindly for the manual release cord. Coughing, dizzy, his knees buckled as the smoke pressed closer. He thought of Mary Ann, her voice, her gentle laughter in the evenings. He had told her once that he didn't need anyone, not even neighbors. He wondered through the haze and heat if she'd be ashamed of what he had become. Then, through the roar of the fire, came another sound, shouting, "Daniel!" It was Imran again. Daniel stumbled to the window. The Rahmans were outside, faces streaked with soot, holding wet cloths over their mouths. Imran was waving. "We can get you out!" he shouted. Daniel could barely see him through the smoke. "Go away!" he rasped. But the younger man didn't listen. He ran toward the side door, wrapped in a blanket, kicking debris aside. Moments later, the kitchen door burst open, and Imran's silhouette appeared through the haze. "Come on!" he yelled. Daniel hesitated, 1 second too long, before collapsing into Imran's arms. The world outside was unrecognizable. Smoke churned like storm clouds, and glowing embers rained down like cursed stars. Imran half-carried, half-dragged Daniel through the yard. The heat was unbearable, the noise deafening. Sarah was already by their car, holding the children close, screaming for them to hurry. Behind them, Daniel's house groaned, beams cracking, windows exploding from the heat. The fire had found every weakness. Imran's car roared to life just as a flaming tree crashed onto the driveway. He swerved around it, tires screeching, visibility near zero. Daniel coughed uncontrollably, clutching his chest. "You shouldn't have come," he rasped. Imran didn't answer. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel. They passed houses engulfed in flames, neighbors running into the smoke. Sirens wailed somewhere in the distance, muffled by the chaos. The Rahman children sobbed quietly in the back seat. Daniel turned his head to look out the window. His fence was gone. His home, his fortress, was now a skeleton of fire and ash. And still, despite the pain and terror, a strange calm filled him. He realized that the man saving his life was the same one he'd tried to drive away. A single thought echoed in his mind, raw and heavy. What have I done? By dawn, they reached the evacuation center, a high school gym turned refuge. Hundreds of people huddled on cots, wrapped in blankets, eyes red from smoke and exhaustion. Daniel sat apart, silent, as medics checked his vitals. Imran was nearby, holding his sleeping son. When a nurse asked how Daniel knew the family, he couldn't answer. Shame tightened his throat. As the morning light grew, so did the murmurs. Lists of homes lost, lives changed. Daniel overheard someone mention East Willow Street. The words, "total loss," rang in his ears like bells of judgment. Later, when Sarah brought him a bottle of water, Daniel could barely meet her eyes. "Why?" he whispered. "Why did you come back for me?" She smiled softly, though her face was streaked with soot. "Because you're our neighbor." Those words hit him harder than the fire ever could. That night, lying on the cot beside the family he had once despised, Daniel stared at the ceiling. The sound of distant sirens still echoed in his head, but now they blended with something new. A faint, flickering hope that maybe, just maybe, redemption was still possible. The morning after the worst night of his life, Daniel asked for a pen. His hands still trembled, but he wrote anyway. Short, uneven lines on a scrap of shelter stationery. He thanked the Ramans for saving him. He apologized for the letter. He admitted the rot that had lived in him for years, the fear masquerading as vigilance. When he handed the note to Imran, he expected anger, a rebuke that would sear worse than smoke. Imran read it quietly and nodded. "Thank you," he said. And the simplicity of those two words unmoored Daniel. He learned the fire had jumped the ridge, devouring East Willow completely. Insurance adjusters would come, papers would be filed, but what had burned could not be tallied in dollars. That afternoon, a counselor visited the cots, guiding the displaced through grief. Daniel listened to neighbors swap stories of near misses and last-minute escapes. He realized he had none to offer. No heroism, only rescue gifted by those he'd wronged. As dusk settled, he asked to sit with the Rahman children and read to them from a donated picture book. Their small heads tilted toward him. Ashes clung to his shoes. Something tender, almost unbearable, began to thaw. Reality arrived as forms and lines. The shelter posted lists, intake numbers, relief stations, mobile clinics. Insurance agents set up folding tables, their keyboards tapping like rain on tin. Daniel found himself moving slowly from queue to queue, answering questions about square footage and contents, reciting inventory from memory as if that could conjure back a life. He loaned his phone charger to Sarah, then sat with Imran to scan documents. Each exchange felt like a stitch pulled through torn cloth. Meanwhile, the Rahmans coordinated rides for elderly neighbors, translating for those whose English faltered, arranging prescriptions and meals. Daniel offered to help, awkward as a novice. He carried boxes, fetched water, handed out masks. When someone asked who he was, Sarah said, "He's our neighbor," and meant it. Later, an aid worker mentioned a temporary motel program. There weren't enough rooms for every family. Without consulting anyone, Daniel told the coordinator to put the Rahmans first. Imran refused. "We share," he insisted. "Either both families get a room or we take cots." In the end, they shared one suite. 2 beds, a pull-out, a kitchenette. Daniel slept on the pull-out and taped a note to the fridge. "We rebuild together." The motel smelled faintly of disinfectant and coffee. Mornings began with quiet rituals. Imran rose early to pray, Sarah brewed tea, the children assembled puzzles on the carpet. Daniel stood, unsure where to fit inside such gentle order. He began washing dishes, then fixing a wobbly table leg, then tightening a loose cabinet hinge with a borrowed screwdriver. He found stability in these small repairs, each turn of the wrist an apology in motion. One afternoon, the kids asked about his wife. He described lemonade summers, the porch radio, the hum she carried in her throat. "She liked Jasmine," he said, and saw Sarah's eyes soften. "So do I," she replied, almost a bridge. That evening, Daniel bought a tray of seedlings from a roadside stand, jasmine, basil, marigolds, and placed them on the motel balcony. The children watered them in paper cups. Later, the family invited Daniel to share dinner. Rice perfumed with cardamom, roasted vegetables, yogurt bright with mint. He tasted something he couldn't name. Nourishment beyond hunger. After dishes, Imran opened a laptop and showed him a map of community relief efforts. "We could help with debris sorting," Imran said. Daniel nodded. "We?" Imran smiled. "Yes, we." The first time Daniel returned to East Willow, he didn't recognize it. The neighborhood had been rewritten in charcoal and wire. Mailboxes stood like lonely teeth. Trees were petrified hands. The air was quieter than silence. They parked near where the jasmine hedge had been, and Daniel felt the ground tilt. He walked to the blackened outline of his house. Ash rose with each step, the fine remains of photographs and chairs and laughter. He crouched and sifted with gloved hands until he found a warped metal locket, Marianne's. Inside, the photo had melted into a bronze fog. He pressed it to his chest and let himself cry without hiding. Imran gave him space, then came to kneel beside him. "We salvage what we can," he said. Together they sorted. A ceramic shard, a half-moon of mirror, a bent picture frame. Across the street, volunteers shoveled, passing water bottles hand to hand. Sarah organized a table of masks and sunscreen, her voice steady, the kids stacking boxes like little foremen. When a neighbor recognized Daniel and stiffened, he didn't look away. "I was wrong," he said simply. The neighbor blinked, then handed him a shovel. "Then help." A week later, the displaced community assembled in the charred shell of the town hall annex. Folding chairs faced a whiteboard scrawled with acronyms: FEMA, VOAD, SBA. The room buzzed with urgency and grief. A city official explained rebuilding tiers and hazard mitigation zones. Volunteers took notes. Voices rose when someone asked about predatory contractors. Daniel sat near the back, feeling both present and unworthy. Then the floor opened for comments. Sarah stood and spoke with calm clarity about equitable distribution, how translation, childcare, and transport would determine who rebuilt and who drifted away. She proposed volunteer-run rides and a pop-up childcare corner at supply depots. Applause followed. Before he could talk himself out of it, Daniel stood too. He admitted to writing the letter. Gasps pricked the air. He didn't defend himself. He asked for work, hard work, the kind that leaves splinters. "Let me earn my place," he said. Silence hovered. Then an older woman nodded. "Start with my fence," she said, voice cracked but kind. The coordinator scribbled assignments. As people filed out, Imran clasped Daniel's shoulder. "You did right," he murmured. Daniel exhaled, shaky but anchored. A different kind of rebuilding had begun. The debris field became a classroom. Daniel learned names he'd never bothered to know. Delia, who fostered cats. Mr. Osei, retired math teacher, Alma, whose tamales had once funded the school band's uniform. He learned the quiet genius of the volunteer crew, how to cradle a brittle beam so it didn't snap, how to read wind shifts by the tremble of a tarp, how to speak to grief without words. He carried heavy things and also light things that were heavy to their owners. A cracked mug, a child's scorched backpack, the wrought iron welcome sign from a porch now gone. When tempers flared or sorrow flooded, Sarah sat with people on the curb and listened until they could stand again. Imran organized tool rotations, safety briefings, and lunch spreads under shade tents. Daniel found that when he introduced himself now, he said, "I'm Daniel, your neighbor," and meant it the way Sarah had. In the afternoons, he brought cold fruit, kept a ledger of supplies, learned to tie better knots. One evening, after a long shift, Mr. Osei pressed a dusty paperback into his hands. The Fire Next Time. Daniel took it home and read until dawn. Permits were slow. Inspections slower, but momentum gathered. A carpentry collective from a nearby city arrived with a box truck of salvaged lumber. Young builders unfurled plans for fire-hardened designs, metal roofs, ember-resistant vents, defensible space. Daniel joined the framing crew despite his age, surprise flickering across faces when they saw how steady his hands were. He remembered angles like old hymns. With each measured cut, he felt a chord resolve. The Rahman's lot had survived as a rectangle of blackened earth, their foundations cracked but intact. They decided to rebuild smaller, with a common courtyard for neighbors to gather, share tea, argue, sing. "We'll grow jasmine again," Sarah said. "And tomatoes," the children added. Daniel's new house would be a one-story cottage with wide doorways, a front bench, and at Imran's insistence, a shared gate instead of a fence. "We can borrow sugar without trespassing," Imran joked. Daniel laughed, startled by the sound. When the first wall went up, volunteers signed the inside studs with messages of blessing. Daniel wrote, "Forgive me, let me learn." He covered the words with insulation, trusting they'd keep more than heat where it belonged. By autumn, green pushed through black soil. The community garden bloomed in raised beds, tended by hands that remembered loss and planted anyway. Saturday mornings became ritual, a pot of spiced tea on a camp stove, kids chasing each other between trellises, elders trading recipes and warnings about wind. Daniel oversaw the tool library, lending drills and sanders with the solemnity of a librarian. He kept a chalkboard of return dates and a plastic jar labeled Fix-It Fund, which somehow was never empty. In the evenings, neighbors gathered on sawhorses around planks that doubled as tables. They ate foods from many kitchens and languages, flatbreads blistered on griddles, stews that tasted of smoke and sweetness, pies that broke into flaky laughter. Daniel told stories about Marianne that made the children giggle and the adults soften. Sometimes, when the air turned cool, Imran invited him to stand quietly while he prayed. Daniel didn't know the words, but he knew the gravity and gratitude. He folded his hands and listened. Later, when he wrote checks to the relief fund, he signed them with a new flourish, as if finally claiming his own signature. Late one afternoon, the sky dimmed unnaturally. Weather alerts chimed, red flag conditions, gusts from the canyons. A collective flinch passed through the neighborhood. This time, no one waited. Hoses were uncoiled, gutters cleared, cars gassed. The volunteer radio net crackled alive, voices calm and practiced. Daniel moved through his checklist, breath steady, ladders down, vents screened, go bag by the door. The children helped water the garden beds to dampen mulch. When a transformer popped on a distant pole, no one panicked. They gathered at the community courtyard, a circle of watchfulness. Wind bullied the trees, then grew bored, then bullied again. Hours stretched. Embers never came. The all-clear arrived close to midnight. Neighbors exhaled together, laughter threaded with relief. Daniel looked up at the dark, clean sky and felt something audacious, joy without denial. He turned to Imran. "Thank you," he said, meaning not that one night, but the life since. Imran nodded. "We did it," he answered, and the plural landed deep. On his way home, Daniel paused at the shared gate, ran his fingers along the smooth wood, and whispered to the sleeping street, "We belong." Months later, with both houses complete, Daniel sat at his new kitchen table and wrote a letter, this time for the bulletin board at the community center. He told the truth about fear, how it had dressed itself as caution and neighborliness. He wrote about the night he almost died, and the hands that pulled him back, about jasmine roots cracking char and finding purchase. He apologized again, not as a performance, but as a practice. He invited anyone carrying the weight he once did to leave it at the tool library and take up something heavier but more useful, a box, a beam, a new habit of listening. He signed it simply, "Your neighbor, Daniel." On opening day of the courtyard, children scattered marigold petals, music drifted, and the first kettle of tea hissed to light. Daniel clipped a small ribbon of blue fabric to the shared gate. When Sarah asked what it meant, he said, "For clear skies and for the courage to share them." That night, he fell asleep to quiet. No sirens, no fear. If you were moved by their story, by how a heart can unlearn what scorched it, please subscribe to follow more journeys of change and hope.